Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Kahani Suno. I'm Kabir, your host. Before we begin, I want you to do something for me today. Take a moment and think about your memories, the ones you're absolutely certain about, the childhood vacation, that important conversation, that life changing moment. Now ask yourself, what if those memories were entirely yours? What if someone or something had tampered with them? What if someone had influenced them? Today's story is called The Memory Keepers, and it's going to make you question everything you think you know about reality, about extinction, about the very history of life on Earth. This is a story about Mark Benson, a man who discovers a truth so profound, so dangerous, that powerful forces will literally erase it from his mind. But there's the thing about truth. Sometimes it finds a way to survive, even when memory fails. So settle in, turn off the lights if you dare, that is, and let me take you on a journey into the unknown. Mark Benson had always been a man of extremes. Not in temperament, he was actually quite calm, methodical even, but in his passions. He didn't just like birds, he was obsessed with them. He could identify over 300 species by their call alone. He didn't just enjoy hiking, he was a mountaineer who had conquered some of the most challenging peaks across 3 continents: India's Western Ghats, the Southern Alps of New Zealand, the rugged ranges of Australia. Each summit had a test, a triumph, a story he would tell with quiet pride over a beer at base camp. But Mark's greatest passion was solitude. While most mountaineers climbed in teams, Mark preferred to go alone. It wasn't that he disliked people. He had friends, a small but close circle who understood his need for isolation. It was simply that in the mountains, alone with the wind and the sky and the ancient rocks, Mark felt most himself. Which is how he found himself. At 42 years old, 3 days in a solo trek through the remote highlands of Madagascar. Madagascar, the island continent, the land that time forgot. A place where 80% of the wildlife existed nowhere else on Earth. Lemurs with eyes like satellites, chameleons the size of your hand, trees that looked like they'd been planted upside down. Mark had been planning this trek for 2 years, a 10-day journey through terrain so isolated that some areas hadn't been mapped in decades. He carried everything he needed on his back: tent, sleeping bag, water purification tablets, enough freeze-dried food to last 2 weeks if he rationed it carefully. It was the afternoon of his 3rd day. The sun hung heavy in a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Mark had been walking since dawn, following a trail that was barely a trail at all, just a suggestion of a path through dense vegetation and volcanic rock. He was hungry. It was time to stop, make camp, prepare something to eat. There was a clearing up ahead, a small flat area surrounded by what looked like acacia trees. Perfect. Mark set down his pack with a grunt of relief. 60 pounds felt like nothing for the first few hours of the day, but by afternoon it felt like carrying a small person. He stretched, feeling his vertebrae crack in a satisfying cascade, and began gathering material for a fire. That's when he saw it. A feather. Now you might think, so what? A feather. Birds lose them all the time. But Mark Benson wasn't just any hiker stumbling upon just any feather. This was different. The feather was large, about 8 inches long, with a distinctive pattern. The base was a soft grey, almost blue, transitioning to white at the tip. The texture was unusually too downy and delicate. not like the sharp aerodynamic feathers of flying birds. Mark picked it up, turning it over in his fingers. Something about it nagged at him. A memory just out of reach. He'd seen something like this before. In a book, a museum. He sat down on a flat rock, still holding the feather, and closed his eyes. Think, Mark, think. The color, the size, the texture, the fact that it clearly belonged to a flightless bird. The structure was all wrong for flight. And then it hit him. Dodo. His eyes snapped open. No, that was impossible. The dodo had been extinct for over 300 years. The last confirmed sighting was in 1662. The bird had been hunted to extinction by Dutch sailors, and the invasive species they brought with them rats, pigs, monkeys. The dodo, having evolved with no natural predators, had been defenseless. Within less than a century of human contact, it was gone. But this feather, Mark held it up to the light. The coloring matched every description he'd ever read. The size was right. The structure was right. He shook his head. "You are overthinking this," he said aloud, his voice strange and intrusive in the quiet forest. "Lots of birds could have feathers like this. You're just tired. Dehydrated, maybe." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Mark carefully placed the feather in his notebook, pressing it between the pages. Then he stood up and began searching the forest floor for kindling. That's when he heard it, a rustling in the undergrowth about 20 feet to his left. Madagascar has no large predators, no big cats, no bears. The largest carnivore was the fossa, which looked like a cross between a cat and a mongoose, and rarely grew larger than 20 pounds. Nothing to be afraid of. Still, Mark froze, listening. The rustling came again, something moving through the bushes, not trying to be quiet. The gait was strange, not the four-legged scurry of a mammal, but something else. A waddle, a shuffle. Mark moved slowly toward the sound, careful to avoid stepping on any dry branches. His heart was beating faster now, though he couldn't have said why. This was what he did: observe wildlife, identify species, nothing to be nervous about. He pushed aside a low-hanging branch and peered into the dense vegetation beyond. And there it was. The bird was about 3 feet tall, with a bulbous body covered in grey-blue plumage. Its legs were short and thick, clearly not built for running. Its wings were tiny, vestigial, absolutely useless for flight. And its face was unmistakable. The large, hooked beak, the small, dark eyes, the almost comical expression, like a creature perpetually surprised by its own existence. Mark's breath caught in his throat. It was a dodo. It couldn't be, but it was. The bird looked at him for a long moment, as if considering whether he was interesting enough to warrant attention. Then it turned and began waddling away, disappearing deeper into the forest with surprising speed for something so ungainly looking. "Wait," Mark fumbled for his camera, his hand shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. He managed to turn it on, raised it to his eye, and the bird was already vanishing into a thicket of vegetation. Mark ran after it, all thoughts of caution abandoned. Branches whipped at his face, vines caught at his feet. He stumbled, recovered, kept running. There, a flash of grey-blue between the trees. He raised the camera again. The autofocus whirred. Click, click, click. The bird paused, turning to look at him one more time. In that moment, with the afternoon light filtering through the canopy above, Mark got his clearest view yet. The distinctive beak, curved and powerful. The round body, almost ridiculous in its proportions. The small wings pressed uselessly against its sides. It was definitely, unmistakably impossible. A dodo. Mark held down the shutter button, taking rapid fire photos. The camera's click, click, click seemed obscenely loud in the quiet forest. And then the bird was gone, crashing through the underground with surprising agility, vanishing into the green shadows. Mark stood there, breathing hard, his camera still raised to his eye, even though there was nothing left to photograph. His hands were shaking, his mind was racing. He'd just seen an extinct bird, a bird that had been gone from this world for over 3 centuries. How was it possible? Mark didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. He sat in his tent, his laptop balanced on his knees, reviewing the photos he'd taken. Most were blurry, just vague shapes that could have been anything. But there were three, maybe four, where you could make out the distinctive shape, the hooked beak, the plump body. It wasn't enough, not for proof, but it was enough for him. He'd seen it, it was real. The next 7 days passed in a blur. Mark completed his trek, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. His mind kept returning to that moment in the forest, that impossible bird. When he finally made it back to the coastal town where his journey had begun, he was exhausted, sunburned, and more certain than ever of what he'd witnessed. He showed the photos to the owner of his guest house, a friendly Malagasy woman named Rena, who'd been running the place for 20 years. She squinted at the screen of his camera, then shrugged. Could be anything, Mr. Mark. Madagascar has many birds. But the beak, Mark insisted. Look at the shape of the beak. Very blurry photo, Rena said diplomatically. Maybe you try again on next trip, yes? He showed them to other travelers staying at the guest house. A couple from Germany looked interested but skeptical. A solo backpacker from Australia said, Mate, that could literally be a pigeon for all we can see in these photos. Mark sent the photos to his friends back home via email, along with a detailed description of what he'd seen. The responses ranged from enthusiastic, That's incredible, you should contact a university, to dismissive, You sure you didn't eat some funny mushrooms out there? To genuinely concerned, Are you feeling okay? The altitude can do strange things to your mind. Nobody believed him, not really. After a week back in civilization, Mark began to doubt himself. Had he really seen what he thought he'd seen? The photos were so unclear and the whole thing seemed so impossible. Extinct species didn't just reappear. He flew home to Seattle, returned to his job as an environmental consultant, and tried to resume his normal life. But the memory of that bird haunted him. He found himself researching the dodo obsessively, reading every historical account, studying every illustration and preserved specimen. The more he learned, the more certain he became. What he had seen was a dodo. There was no doubt in his mind. But without proof, what could he do? 3 weeks after his return from Madagascar, Mark was having his morning coffee and browsing the news on his tablet when a headline caught his eye. Extinct dodo bird rediscovered in Madagascar. Mark tearfully dropped his coffee. He clicked on the article, his heart pounding. According to the report, a team of researchers from the University of Oxford, working in collaboration with the Madagascar National Parks Authority, had made an extraordinary discovery. In a remote region of the island's Central Highlands, they had found a population of dodo birds, between 50 and 70 individuals. including approximately 25 breeding females. The birds were living in an isolated valley that had never been fully surveyed. The researchers hypothesized that the population had survived in this refuge for centuries, protected by the difficult terrain and their own secretive nature. This is one of the most significant zoological discoveries of the century. Dr. Eleanor Hartley, the lead researcher, was quoted as saying, "We always hoped that rumors of the dodo's complete extinction might be exaggerated, but to actually find a viable breeding population, it's beyond our wildest dreams." Mark read the article 3 times, then he read every other article he could find about the discovery. Then he pulled up his photos from Madagascar and examined them again. He'd seen one of these birds weeks before the official discovery was announced. He immediately emailed his photos to the research team mentioned in the article, along with the detailed account of his sighting. He explained that he was an experienced mountaineer and bird watcher, not some random tourist who'd misidentified a chicken. To his surprise, he received a response within 2 days. Dr. Hartley herself wrote back, "Dear Mr. Benson, thank you for sharing your photographs and account. I'm pleased to inform you that your sighting is consistent with our discovery. The location you describe is approximately 15 kilometers from where we found the main population. It's quite possible you encountered an individual or small group that had ranged away from the primary colony. Your photos, while not of publication quality, are consistent with our observations of Rhaphis caculatus. The distinctive beak shape visible in the image 3 is particularly convincing. You may very well be one of the first people in modern times to have documented this species in the wild. We would be delighted to interview about your experience for our research records." Mark stayed at the email for a long time. Vindication. He'd been right. He'd seen something extraordinary. And now the world knew it was real. But something bothered him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. That night, unable to sleep, he found himself going down an internet rabbit hole. He started with articles about the dodo discovery, then moved to other recent zoological findings. Species thought extinct that had been rediscovered. Animals that appeared in places they'd never been seen before. And then he found something else. A series of reports, some from reputable news sources, others from fringe websites, about UFO sightings in Madagascar. Multiple sightings over the past 6 months, concentrated in the central highlands. Mark frowned at his screen. UFOs? That was ridiculous. That was tinfoil hat conspiracy theory territory. But the timing bothered him. The sightings had begun approximately 6 months before his trek, 6 months before the dodo discovery. He closed his laptop and went to bed, but sleep, when it finally came, was troubled by strange dreams. Birds with too many eyes, lights in the sky, voices speaking in language he couldn't understand. 2 months later, Mark was on a plane back to Madagascar. He told his boss he needed more time off personally for another expedition. He told his friends he wanted to try to photograph the dodos. Now he knew they were real. He told his sister, the only family member he was close to, that he just needed to get away for a while, clear his head. All of these were lies. The truth was simpler and stranger. Mark needed to know. The UFO reports gnawed at him. The timing of the dodo discovery gnawed at him. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. He wasn't sure what he expected to find. He just knew he had to look. This time, Mark didn't stay at Rena's guest house. He rented a small room on the outskirts of town and kept to himself. He didn't want people asking questions about why he'd come back so soon. He spent 2 days gathering supplies and information. He talked to locals about the UFO sightings, being casual about it, treating it like idle curiosity rather than serious research. The stories were inconsistent, as such stories always were. A farmer claimed to have seen a disc shaped object hovering his field at dawn. Two children said they'd seen lights dancing in the sky. An elderly woman swore she'd watched something land in the forest, though, when pressed for details, her story became vague and contradictory. But there was one consistent element. All the sightings were concentrated in the same general area. The same area where Mark had seen the dodo. The same area where the research team had made their discovery. On the third day, Mark set out on his trek. This time he wasn't heading for any particular peak or following any established route. He was going back to that clearing, the place where he'd seen the dodo. He needed to see it again, examine it more carefully. He told no one where he was going or when he'd be back. If his sister could see him now, she'd call him reckless. Maybe she'd be right. It took him a day and a half to reach the area. He made camp a half-mile from the clearing, wanting to approach it in daylight when he could see clearly. That night, lying in his tent, Mark heard sounds in the forest. Not the usual nocturnal sounds, insects, small mammals, the occasional bird call. These were different, mechanical, a low humming that seemed to vibrate in his chest, a sound like nothing he'd ever heard before. He unzipped his tent and peered out into the darkness. The forest was black, impenetrable. The humming continued for perhaps 5 minutes and then faded away. Mark didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, he approached the clearing carefully, moving slowly, stopping often to listen. When he finally reached it, he stopped dead in his tracks. The vegetation had been disturbed. No, disturbed wasn't the right word. Compressed, flattened. There was a roughly circular area, maybe 15 meters in diameter, where all the plants had been pressed down towards the ground. Not broken or crushed, but pressed, as if something immensely heavy had sat there. Mark knelt at the edge of the affected area, running his hands over the flattened vegetation. The plants weren't dead. They were still green, still alive, but they'd been shaped, molded, pushed down with tremendous force. Even as he watched, some of them were slowly, incrementally rising back up, like memory foam gradually returning to its original shape. Whatever had created this impression had been here recently, within the last few hours. Mark's hands were shaking as he pulled out his camera and began taking photos. He photographed the entire area from multiple angles, making sure to capture the way the plants were pressed down, the circular pattern of the impression. He was so focused on his photography that he almost didn't hear it, the sound of something moving through the forest, something large. Mark froze, camera halfway to his face. The sound came again, closer this time, not the random crashing of an animal moving through undergrowth. This was deliberate, purposeful. And then he saw it. Through the trees, a shape, not a shape, a craft. It was descending slowly, gracefully, lowering itself into the exact spot where the vegetation had been compressed. The craft was roughly disc-shaped, but with irregular edges, like someone had melted the corners of a coin. Its surface seemed to shift and flow, colors playing across it like oil on water. There was no visible propulsion system, no jets or rotors, yet it moved with perfect control. Mark stood transfixed, unable to move, unable to think. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. The craft settled into place with barely a sound, fitting into the compressed area as perfectly as a key in a lock. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a section of the craft side, Mark couldn't have said where it began or ended, began to open. Not sliding or swinging, but simply becoming open, as if the solid surface has decided to be permeable instead. And two figures emerged. They weren't like the aliens in movies. No grey skin, no enormous heads, no spindly limbs. These beings were wearing suits, environmental suits. They looked almost human-shaped, with helmets that obscured most of their features. But through the transparent face plates, Mark could see large eyes, very large eyes. Too large. The two figures stood still for a moment, seeming to scan the area. Then one of them turned and looked directly at Mark.
"We know you're there,"
the figure said. The voice was clear, unaccented English, coming from some kind of speaker in the suit.
"Please come out. We won't harm you."
Mark's brain had stopped working. This couldn't be real. He was hallucinating. He'd eaten something poisonous. He'd hit his head. He was dying of dehydration, and this was his brain's last desperate fantasy. But the craft was still there. The beings were still there, and they were speaking to him.
"Mr. Benson,"
the second figure said.
"Mark Benson, we really do know you're there. Please, there's no point in hiding."
They knew his name. That broke through his paralysis. On shaking legs, Mark stood up from behind the trees where he'd been crouching and stepped into the clearing. The two beings watched him approach. Now that he was closer, he could see more details. Their suits were a material he didn't recognize, something between fabric and metal, seeming to be both flexible and rigid at once. Their gloves were thick, protective. Their boots left no imprints in the soft ground. And their eyes, even though the helmets, even at this distance, their eyes were wrong. Too large, too dark, pupils that seemed to reflect light like a cat's. "Hello." His voice came out as a croak. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Hello. I'm Mark Benson. But you already know that."
"We do,"
the first figure said. The voice was somehow both emotionless and warm.
"We have been expecting you. Not you specifically, but someone like you. Someone curious enough to come looking."
What? Mark's mind was reeling. What are you doing here? Who are you? Are you from Earth?
"No,
the second figure said.
we are not from Earth. But we have been coming here for a very long time. Thousands of years, by your measurement."
Why? Mark asked. Why come here? The two figures looked at each other, a very human gesture. Then the first one turned back to Mark.
"That's a complicated question with a complicated answer. But since you have found us, since you're asking, would you like to come aboard? We can explain better inside."
Every survival instinct Mark possessed was screaming at him to run. Year 4 abduction stories flashed through his mind. People taken aboard alien craft, subjected to experiments, returned with missing time and scrambled memories. But his curiosity was stronger than his fear. It always had been. "Will you let me leave?" he asked.
"Of course.
The first figure said.
You're not a prisoner. You're a guest. A very unexpected, very persistent guest. But a guest nonetheless."
Mark took a deep breath. "Okay, show me." The interior of the craft was both familiar and alien. There were seats, actual seats, sized for human proportions. There were control panels with switches and displays. There was lighting that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, soft and shadowless. But there were also things Mark couldn't identify, surfaces that seemed to be solid until you touched them, then became translucent. Containers filled with liquid that glowed with its own internal light, symbols and readouts that hurt to look at, as if they existed in more dimensions than his eyes could process. One of the beings gestured to a seat. "Please sit, you'll find it comfortable." Mark sat. The chair molded itself to his body, and he fought the urge to jump back up. But it was comfortable, more comfortable than any chair he had ever sat in. The two beings took seats facing him. They still hadn't removed their helmets. "I'm going to ask you some questions," Mark said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice, "and I'd like honest answers."
We'll give you what we can.
The first being said. "Are you responsible for the dodos? Did you bring them back?" The beings looked at each other again. It was clearly some form of communication, though Mark couldn't read what was being expressed.
Yes.
The second being said finally.
We reintroduced them approximately 8 months ago. A breeding population of 73 individuals, carefully selected for genetic diversity.
Mark's mind reeled. But why? They have been extinct for 3 centuries. Why bring them back now?
We bring back many species.
The first being said.
Not just extinct ones, we also introduce new species. We have been doing this for millennia.
But why?
Think of us as gardeners.
The second being said.
Earth is an experiment, Mr. Benson, not in the cruel sense. We are not torturing anyone. But this planet, this biosphere, it's a work in progress. We plant seeds, we tend the garden, we introduce new elements and remove failed ones.
Mark felt cold. You're saying life on Earth, all of it, is an experiment? You created it?
Created? No. We didn't create life itself. That emerged naturally, as it has on many worlds, but we have been shaping it, guiding it, for longer than your species has existed.
The first being leaned forward slightly.
Your scientists use something called carbon dating to determine the age of fossils, yes?
Yes, Mark said slowly.
Those dates are not accurate. We manipulate the isotopic ratios in the specimens we introduce. A bird that's actually 10 years old can appear to be 10 million years old when you test it.
Mark felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. The dinosaurs.
One of our less successful experiments.
The second being admitted.
They lasted approximately 4,000 years before we had to remove them. Not the millions of years your paleontologists believe.
This is insane, Mark whispered. This can't be real.
And yet you're here.
The first being said gently.
Sitting in our ship, having this conversation.
Mark's mind was spinning. Questions piled up faster than he could ask them. How long have you been doing this? How many of you are here? Why Earth? What's the point of it all?
We have been visiting Earth for approximately 40,000 years.
The second being said.
There are many of us, you'd call it a civilization. Though our social structure is different from yours, we chose Earth because it showed promise. Because the conditions were right for complex life. As for why we do it,
The being paused.
why does your species plant gardens? Why do you breed dogs and horses and crops? Curiosity. Curiosity. The desire to create, to see what's possible.
But we are not plants, Mark said. We are not dogs. We are intelligent beings. We have a civilization, art, science.
Yes,
The first being said.
you are our proudest achievement, Homo sapiens. We didn't create you, but we guided your evolution. Subtle genetic modification over thousands of generations. We are very pleased with how you have turned out.
Mark wanted to vomit. The idea that humanity itself was some kind of alien science project.
I can see you're disturbed.
The second being said.
That's understandable. Most people are when they learn the truth.
Most people? Mark's head snapped up. You have told others about all of this?
Oh, yes. We encounter curious humans quite regularly. People who see things they shouldn't, who ask too many questions, who piece together patterns. We explain things to them, much as we're explaining things to you.
But I have never heard of this, Mark said. If you're telling people, why hasn't anyone? He stopped. Understanding crashed over him like a wave. You make them forget? He whispered.
We erase the memory of this encounter, yes.
The first being confirmed.
We have a device that can selectively remove specific neural patterns. When you leave this shape, you won't remember any of this conversation.
Like in Men in Black, Mark said abruptly. The neuralizer.
That film was surprisingly accurate in some respects.
The second being said.
Though our technology is more sophisticated and has fewer side effects.
Mark stood up abruptly. I won't let you. I'll run.
You can't escape it.
The first being said calmly.
The device has already been activated. It's been running since you entered the ship, mapping your neural patterns. When you leave, we'll trigger the second phase, and these memories will be gone.
Then why tell me at all? Mark shouted. Why explain everything if you're just going to erase it? The two beings were quiet for a moment.
Because the erasure isn't perfect.
The second being said finally.
Memories aren't stored in one place in the brain. They are distributed, networked. We can remove the conscious memory of this event, but fragments remain. Echoes. Some people who have had this encounter, the first being continued, they don't remember it happening, but years later they develop theories, write stories, create art. Ideas bubble up from their subconscious. Ideas that are remarkably close to the truth. We find this accidental.
The second being said.
These theories exist alongside hundreds of others. Most people dismiss them as science fiction, conspiracy nonsense, but the truth is out there, hidden in plain sight, for those with eyes to see it.
Mark sank back into his chair. So I'll forget this, but some part of me might remember, might create some theory about alien gardeners tending Earth's biosphere.
Exactly.
The first being said. And when you do, when you publish that theory, you'll find that others have had similar ideas. People across the world from different cultures with no contact with each other, all proposing the same basic concept. Because they all met you too, Mark said. They all had encounters they don't remember.
Yes.
Mark was quiet for a long time, processing everything he had learned. Then a thought occurred to him. You said you remove failed experiments. What does that mean? The beings exchanged another look.
Sometimes our introductions don't work.
The second being said carefully.
Sometimes a species proves too aggressive or too fragile or disrupts the ecosystem in ways we didn't anticipate. When that happens, we remove them.
The extinction events, Mark whispered. The mass extinctions throughout Earth's history, those weren't asteroids or climate change, or some were natural, the first being interrupted.
But others, yes, we deemed certain experiments failures and cleaned the slate to try something new.
Mark felt sick. How many times?
Several. The most recent was approximately 11,000 years ago. You call it the Younger Trias Impact Event. We call it Megafauna Removal Initiative.
You killed the mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, all of them?
They were becoming too dominant. We wanted to give smaller mammals, including your ancestors, room to evolve and spread.
Mark stood up again. This time, not in anger, but in horror. You're telling me you commit genocide on a planetary scale? You wipe out entire species when they inconvenience your experiment?
We understand why you find this upsetting.
The second being said.
But please understand, we don't take these decisions lightly. We monitor, we evaluate, we debate. We only intervene when we believe it's necessary for the long-term health of the biosphere.
Who gave you the right? Mark demanded. What makes you think you can play God with an entire planet?
No one gave us the right.
The first being said.
We simply have the capability. And with capability comes a responsibility. If we abandoned Earth now, left you to your own devices, do you know what would happen?
Mark said nothing.
Your species is on the verge of triggering its own mass extinction event. Climate change, habitat destruction, pollution. Within 200 years, you will have wiped out 60% of all species on Earth. Within 500 years, you might render the planet uninhabitable.
We are trying to prevent that, Mark said.
You are.
The second being agreed.
Some of you, at least, but it may not be enough. We are monitoring the situation closely. If it becomes clear that Homo sapiens has become a failed experiment, we'll have to make difficult decisions.
The implications hung in the air like a blade. Mark felt all the fight drain out of him. What could he say? What could he do? These beings have been manipulating life on Earth for 40,000 years. They had the technology to erase his memory, to travel between stars, to reshape entire ecosystem. He was as powerless as an ant arguing with a human about to step on its hill.
We should go.
The first being said, standing.
We've been here too long already. If you're spotted entering or leaving our ship, it could cause complications.
Mark stood on shaking legs. Before you erase my memory, can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Why do you care? Why tend this garden at all? What do you get out of it? The two beings looked at each other for a long moment. When they turned back to Mark, he could have sworn he saw something like emotion in those large, dark eyes.
Hope.
The second being said softly.
We are an old species, Mr. Benson, very old. We have long since solved the problem that plague younger civilization. War, disease, scarcity. In solving those problems, we lost something. Spontaneity, unpredictability, wonder. Earth,
the first being continued,
is our reminder that life can still surprise us. Every species that evolves here, every unexpected adoption, every beautiful accident, it reminds us why existence is worth continuing. You humans, especially, you are violent and short-sighted and destructive. Yes, but you're also creative and passionate and capable of such profound beauty. You give us hope
Second being said.
that the universe is still capable of creating something new, something wonderful.
Mark didn't know what to say to that.
Come,
The first being said, gesturing toward the exit.
it's time.
Mark stumbled out of the forest 3 hours after dawn, disoriented and confused. He had a pounding headache, worse than any hangover he had ever experienced. His clothes were dirty, torn in places. There was a bruise on his arm he couldn't remember getting. The last thing he clearly remembered was making camp the night before last. Everything after that was a blur. Had he hit his head, eaten something that disagreed with him? He checked his camera. The last photos were of the clearing where he'd seen the dodo weeks ago. Nothing unusual, just trees and plants. Mark made his way back to town, puzzled but not overly concerned. The mountains could be disorienting. He'd probably just gotten lost, wasted a day wandering in circles. It happened to the best of them. He flew home to Seattle and tried to forget the whole strange trip. 7 years later, Mark Benson, now 49, sat in his home office staring at his computer screen. For 7 years, something had been nagging at him. A feeling, an idea that wouldn't leave him alone. It had started small, just a vague sense that there was a connection between certain things, the reappearance of supposedly extinct species, the reports of UFO sightings, the strange coincidences in the timing. At first, he dismissed it as conspiracy thinking. He wasn't that guy. He was a scientist, rational, evidence-based in his thinking. But the feeling persisted and grew, and eventually he started writing it down. What if extinction wasn't always natural? What if some species disappear and reappeared because someone or something was controlling it? What if life on Earth wasn't as random as we'd been taught? What if there were gardeners tending to the biosphere, planting and pruning as they saw fit? It sounded insane when he thought about it like that, but when he looked at the evidence, really looked at it, patterns emerged. Patterns that shouldn't exist if everything was truly random. Mark had spent the last 2 years developing his theory, refining it, gathering what evidence he could. And now he'd written it all down, a paper, 35 pages of carefully reasoned arguments, documented observations, and testable hypotheses. He called it the cultivation hypothesis, evidence of external management of Earth's biosphere. His fingers hovered over the publish button on the academic preprint server. Once he clicked it, there was no taking it back. He'd been out there publicly suggesting something that most of his colleagues would consider pseudo-scientific nonsense. But he had to do it. The idea demanded to be shared. Mark clicked publish. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, Mark's paper had been downloaded over 10,000 times. Within a month, over 100,000. The academic world was divided. Many dismissed it as fringe theory, unfalsifiable speculation masquerading as science. But others, more than Mark had expected, found it intriguing, very compelling. And then the emails started coming. The first one was from a marine biologist in Australia. Dr. Benson, I read your paper with great interest. I have been developing a similar theory about the sudden reappearance of certain fish species thought to be extinct. Your framework explains observations I have been unable to account for. Would love to discuss. Then one from a paleontologist in Argentina. Your hypothesis about carbon dating manipulating is fascinating. I have encountered several anomalies in my own work that might support this. The isotopic ratios in certain fossils don't match what we'd expect. And another from a wildlife photographer in Canada. I know this will sound crazy, but I once saw something in the woods of British Columbia, a craft of some kind. I don't remember much about it, but your paper brought back feelings, fragments, like I'm remembering a dream. The emails kept coming in. Dozens, then hundreds, people from all over the world, from different fields, different backgrounds. And the remarkable thing was how similar their theories were to his. People who'd never met him, never communicated with each other, who developed almost identical ideas about external forces managing Earth's biosphere. The odds of that happening by chance were astronomical. Unless they were all remembering something that had been taken from them but hadn't been fully erased. 6 months after publishing his paper, Mark Benson stood before a crowd of journalists, academics, and curious onlookers in a conference room at the University of Washington. He'd been invited to present his findings at a symposium on controversial scientific theories. He'd expected maybe 50 people to show up. Instead, the room held 300, with another 200 watching the live stream online. Mark took a deep breath and began. Thank you all for coming. I want to start by acknowledging that what I am about to discuss sounds like science fiction. I understand the skepticism. I share it. But I ask you to keep an open mind and examine the evidence. He clicked on his first slide, a chart showing extinction and reappearance patterns over the last century. Over the past 50 years, we've seen an unprecedented number of Lazarus species, creatures thought to be extinct, that suddenly reappear. The dodo in the Madagascar, which I personally encountered, the Tasmanian tiger, with credible sightings in 2019, the ivory-billed woodpecker, the list goes on. Now, conventional explanations suggest these species were never truly extinct, just very rare and hiding in remote areas, but the pattern is strange. These rediscoveries cluster in specific regions and time periods, almost as if someone were releasing them. He clicked to the next slide, a timeline of UFO sightings. Now I know you're thinking, UFOs? Really? But bear with me. If we map reported UFO sightings over the same 50 years period, we see a correlation. Areas with high UFO activity tend to have higher rates of Lazarus species rediscovery shortly afterward. A murmur ran through the audience. Some people were shaking their hands, others were leaning forward, intrigued. I'm not saying this proves anything, Mark continued. Correlation isn't causation, but it's worth investigating, isn't it? He clicked again, this time to a slide showing anomalies in carbon dating. Then there's this. My colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen at MIT, had documented 17 instances in the past decade where carbon dating results for recently rediscovered species don't make sense. The isotopic ratios suggest these creatures are much older than they should be, given that they are clearly alive right now. It's as if someone manipulated the samples to appear older than they are. But why would anyone do that? What purpose would it serve? Mark paused, looking at the sea of faces. Here's my hypothesis. The cultivation hypothesis. Earth's biosphere is being actively managed by an external intelligence. This intelligence introduces species, removes species, and manipulates our evidence to maintain the illusion that everything is happening naturally. The room erupted in sound. Some people laughing, others shouting questions. others arguing with their neighbors. Mark raised his voice. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I have questioned my own sanity more times than I can count. But here's the thing that convinced me this is worth pursuing. He clicked to his final slide, a world map with hundreds of dots representing locations. These dots represent people who have contacted me since I published my paper. People who have independently developed similar theories. People who describe having strange memory gaps. People who report feeling like they have forgotten something important but can't quite remember what. The geographic distribution is random, but the theories are nearly identical. How do you explain that? Mass delusion? Shared cultural narratives? Possibly. But what if it's something else? What if all these people have encountered something? Something that was then erased from their conscious memory, but that left traces, echoes, fragments. Mark leaned forward, gripping the podium. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to investigate, to look at the evidence with fresh eyes, to consider the possibility that we are not alone in managing this planet's biodiversity. And if that's true, if there really are external forces shaping life on Earth, then we need to understand what they want, what their goals are, and whether our survival depends on meeting their expectations. The room felt silent. Mark looked out at the crowd, at the skeptical faces and the thoughtful ones and the openly hostile ones. I know I might be wrong, he said quietly. I probably am wrong, but what if I'm not? What if everything we think we know about the history of life on Earth is incomplete? Don't we owe it out to ourselves, to our species, to find out? Late that night, Mark sat alone in his hotel room, scrolling through the social media reaction to his press conference. They were, as expected, brutal. Cultivation hypothesis was trending, but mostly as a joke. Memes about alien gardeners, jokes about Mark needing therapy, a few supportive comments drowned out by ridicule. But mixed in were other messages. Private messages from people who said they believed him, who said they had experiences they couldn't explain, who said they'd been thinking the same things for years but were afraid to say it out loud. One message in particular caught his attention. It was from someone with the username "The Truth Remains." Dr. Benson, you're closer to the truth than you know, but you'll never fully remember. None of us will. They make sure of that. All we can do is keep pointing at the patterns, keep asking questions, keep the idea alive, because somewhere buried deep in our collective unconscious, we know, we have always known, we are not alone. We never have been. Keep fighting for the truth. It's all we have. Mark stared at the message for a long time. Then he closed his laptop and looked out the window at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere up there, beyond the clouds, the stars, and the vast emptiness of space, were there really beings watching Earth, tending to it like a garden, making decisions about which species lived and which died? He didn't know. We might never know for certain. But deep in his mind, in a place he couldn't quite reach, Mark felt something. A memory that wasn't quite a memory. Large, dark eyes looking at him with something like kindness. A voice saying, "You give us hope." He shook his head, dismissing the feeling as imagination. But it wasn't going away, and that, more than anything, told him he was onto something. Something real, something important. Something that the universe didn't want him to forget. no matter how hard it tried to make him. Phew. And that's where our story ends or begins. Depends on how you look at it. Mark Benson continues his research to this date. His cultivation hypothesis remains controversial, dismissed by mainstream science but embraced by a growing community of researchers who see the patterns he sees. Are they all remembering something that was taken from them? Or they are falling into a trap of seeing patterns where none exists, of connecting dots that shouldn't be connected? I don't have the answer, neither does Mark. But I leave you with this thought. What if every conspiracy theory, every strange idea that seemed to arise independently in multiple minds across the world is an echo of something real, something that was once known but has been deliberately forgotten? What if the truth is out there, hiding not in secret documents or government facilities, but in the collective unconscious of humanity itself? In the theories we dismiss as crazy, the stories we tell ourselves, the dreams we can't quite remember. Maybe the real question isn't whether Mark's theory is true. Maybe the real question is, why do so many people feel like they've forgotten something important? What have we forgotten? And who or what made us forget? I'll let you think about it. This has been The Memory Keepers, written and narrated by Kabir for Kahani Suno. If this story made you think, made you question, made you wonder, share it with someone. Leave us your theories in the comments. Tell us what you think you might have forgotten. And remember, truth isn't always found in what we remember. Sometimes it's found in what we can't quite forget. Until next time, keep listening, keep questioning, and never stop asking why. This is Kabir from Kahani Suno, reminding you that reality is stranger than we have been allowed to remember. Sweet dreams, everyone, if you can.